guy here is a dung beetle, and he is one of 6 different species being bred by the team at Dung Beetle Innovations in Shelley Beach, northwest of Auckland. Today on Thinking Forward, we're going to meet the team from Dung Beetle Innovations and find out how they are breeding up stocks of these beetles to sell to New Zealand farmers. Dung beetles are used a lot on farming overseas, and today we're going to find out about their future here in New Zealand.
Way back in 2009, there was a whole movement where we thought about the idea of approaching a bunch of end users, basically made up of farmers, to look at the idea of seeking permission from the government to bring in a suite of dung beetles that we'd figure would be useful for looking at all of the potential problems and potentially alleviating those problems with the dung beetles by using dung beetles on these pastures. And so back in 2009, we embarked on a whole mission to look at the importation of a series of beetles. So it's been some time. So it was an end user group created called the Dung Beetle Release Strategy Group. It had co-funding by various non-government organisations and also government ones such as MPI, Landcare Research put money in there, Beef and Lamb, and a various bunch of farmers as well that were very interested in it. So this group put forth an application to the government, which then was called the Environmental Risk Management Authority. So many acronyms, IRMA. It's now called the EPA, Environmental Protection Authority. So we had to put in an application, which is a huge process of risks, costs and benefits, to make sure that what we were applying to bring in was actually was safe and sound when we bring in a new organism to New Zealand. Back in 2009, this whole thing has started. So over several years, we've managed to get the permission from the government and bring in several species so far into a containment facility and disease test those new organisms that come in, release from containment and start a process of establishment and releases around the country. So that's where it all started.
So tell us about the beetles. You know, what do they do? How do they work? Are they different?
Yes, well, so a dung beetle, as its name says, lives and breeds in poo. And it's not the most glamorous of jobs, but behind the scenes, these guys are like little environmental engineers. And when you think about bringing in agricultural livestock to a country such as New Zealand and many other countries around the world, more often than not, they're brought in without a suite of beetles that are co-evolved with them to actually bury the manure once it's produced by the animal and complete a recycling process beneath the soil surface. So they physically remove that fresh cow pat or horse manure or goat or sheep beneath the soil surface, and in doing so, that gets it off the pasture surface and it gets assimilated into that soil horizon, and all of those benefits that we've been banging on about, the idea of what we can do to improve sustainable farming, all these things are attributed to just the burying and the tunnel behaviour of dung beetles. It's a natural recycle process. So we've got permission to bring in 11 different types of beetles into New Zealand, and we have that because there are different beetles that are active at different times of the year. So we've got ones that are summer and spring active, other ones that are active in winter time, and also because New Zealand's a long country, it goes through fairly different environmental conditions and also habitat changes too. So we've got beetles that are useful down at the bottom of the South Island and those that are useful in the north. Plus there are beetles that are also nighttime active and those that are active at daytime, because we all know livestock generally produce poos. It's a 24 hours, 7 days, 365 days a year problem that accumulates. So we have to have a number of beetles that are active all year round. So, and hence that's why we've got 11.
Sean, can you tell me about the life cycle of a dung beetle?
Yeah, so the typical dung beetle life cycle is pretty much like a butterfly's life cycle. It starts off as an egg, and from an egg it develops into a grub or a larva. That larva goes through 3 different stages as it gets fatter and bigger, and then that develops into a pupa. After a period of time, that'll turn into a brand new adult, and that cycle changes. What's different between butterflies and beetles, of course, because it's a beetle, and a dung beetle as such, is that egg stage is produced inside a ball of dung beneath the soil surface. Dung beetles, as part of their life cycle, produce brood balls or sausages. It depends on what the shape looks like, but for all intensive purposes, we call it a ball. And it's a brood ball because inside the ball, the mum lays an egg into, and that's where a life cycle will start, where the egg turns into grub. But the brood ball is the key thing for the dung beetle. So unlike other scarab beetles, like black beetles that live in the pasture, their grubs freely move around amongst the soil and amongst the grass, and they chew the grass. The key thing that separates the dung beetles from those sorts of scarabs that live in there that are potential pests for grass, like grass grubs, they're scarabs. So they're in the same big family as dung beetles. Dung beetles, on the other hand, live inside a brood ball, and they're encapsulated inside there. So they're stuck or entombed inside that ball, and they have this very unusual hump shape to live inside a sphere as they chew around, eating around them, until that cavity gets bigger and bigger. But they're always entombed in a brood ball. So that's where they stay throughout their development phase. They don't wander off and feed on anything else. They're stuck in there. And that's provisioned by their mum and dad, that brood ball. All right, so let's get this container. There we go. And let's just put this down here. So we're just going to take out the old poo and collect some brood balls out of this bin. There you go. So I've got a bit of old poo in there, and we're going to put this on a table. So if there's any beetles inside that poo, they're just going to drop through into this collection thing, so we don't lose anything. So that life cycle, depending on the different types of beetles, can be quite quick, from as little as 8 or 9 weeks, all the way up to 6 months for the bigger beetles. And in some beetles, of which we're going to bring some in shortly to New Zealand, are about a year from that egg to that adult. So it's variable between the different species.
Sean, tell me about the challenges of trying to import live beetles into New Zealand.
The challenge is such, I think, a lot of the groundwork, because of things that have gone wrong simply through accidental introductions, which have happened countless times in the past. A lot of current applied entomological work these days, which is working with insects and controlling insect pests or plant pests, is importing new organisms to try and control those things naturally, such as biological control. And so we've had lots of things that have gone wrong with accidental introductions. You remember red tussock moth and all these things, we try to control them. There's many weeds we try to control with insects as well. So some of the key things in this instance is that it's manure that's always produced. That's a never-ending product that we need to clean up. So we're biologically controlling that manure by bringing in the beetles for it. The challenges as such, I think, are more along the terms of, because of all the things that have been gone through and gone wrong in the past that we've tried to correct. We have an Environmental Protection Authority with this very stringent set of protocols and procedures looking at the risks, costs and benefits. And that applies to all new organisms and new substances that come in. It's the Has-No Act, which is responsible for this. That's probably the biggest challenge in terms of making sure everything that's being brought in is safe and sound, and it's not going to go and wander off and go and do something completely different to what we have said that it would do. But in terms of bringing in the beetle, it's a box-ticking exercise with procedures in which things come to quarantine and then they get disease tested and then following the protocols out from that. So that stuff's pretty straightforward if you know how to do it and you have all the permits.
We're talking with Sean Forgy from Dung Beetle Innovations and looking at the future possibilities in the farming industry.
We're looking at the dispersal capability of a few of our beetles. And so we have some researchers here from the University of Riverside, California, that have special equipment to determine the maximum likely dispersal capability of each species.
So my name's Mark Hoddle. I'm a biological control specialist. I'm based at the University of California in Riverside. So how do we figure out how these beetles fly? Well, we have one of the dung beetles here. This is the power beetle, Geotrupes spinager. It's one of the ones that's been approved for release in New Zealand. And what we do is we attach it to this little saddle or tether, and we use hot glue to do that. Then that tether is attached to this rotor. And then when the beetle flies, opens its wings and starts flying, each rotation is 1 meter. And in this little box, we have a laser beam that's reading notches on this little glass disc. So each time the disc goes, the laser beam is broken, and that sends data down that cord to a decoder. And then those binary bits are then transformed into data that the laptop can read. So with the software we have on the computer, we can answer several questions. Obviously, one that we want to know is how far can the beetles fly? So the computer can accumulate the number of rotations and then in a 24-hour period, sum all those up and then tell us how many meters or kilometers it flew within a 24-hour period. Because the laptop can put a time and date signature on the flight activity, we know whether they like to fly during the day, maybe in the evening, maybe they fly late at night. Sometimes these beetles may fly for a couple hours, maybe they stop for 3 or 4 hours, maybe they fly again, so we can look at the periodicity, how often, how frequently they're flying. And then the other types of data that we've collected is that we've measured the beetles so we know how big they are, we've weighed them, we've sexed them. So taking those variables like weight, sex, size, and correlating that with flight activity, we might find that maybe girls fly further than the boys. Or maybe the big beetles fly further than smaller, lighter beetles. And all of these data which address those particular questions help us fill in the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and we'll have a better idea of how these beetles fly, and that'll help us manage their releases into the New Zealand's pastures in a more efficient way.
Very shortly, we're about to embark in a MAF Sustainable Farming Fund project, which is co-funded by Landcare Research and Beef and Lamb, looking at E. coli. That's one of the key indicators for water quality beneath individual cow pats that have been managed by dung beetles. So they've got huge, great soil cores extracted out of the ground in basically soils prone to compacting and pugging. We want to see if dung beetle activity beneath cow pats in those types of soils will attribute to any improvements in what gets through into the water beneath the soil horizon following dung beetle activity. The other part of it is looking at soil quality and the soil chemistry, the soil structure as well. So there's kind of 3 facets we're looking at, and that will start at the end of March. This business you'd probably consider a medium to high risk business, probably because it's a biological organism. It'd be lovely if I could set up a manufacturing plant and create a mold and just rubber stamp 100,000 dung beetles just like that and just churn them out like a manufactured product. But because they're a biological product, there's all sorts of issues in terms of mass rearing and trying to get the numbers up, because there's a lot of customers waiting. So it's supply and demand. And as I say, the biological process involved in rearing these things on a large commercial scale takes a bit of effort and a bit of technical kudos to be able to do it. And that's the trick, I think, is behind it, is how to do it on a big scale, minimalising disease risk, all those things. So it's quite tricky. So there's the emergence holes, and the beetles are all coming up. So these guys end up walking into the little pitfall trap. Any new organism coming into containment is brought in specifically for us to make sure that there are no problems downstream. And the key thing for that is diseases. So when a new organism comes in, we have to screen for a series of diseases to make sure they're disease-free before they're even allowed to be applied to leave containment or quarantine, so to speak. And so there are certain things like internal parasites, such as gregarines, or things that live in the guts or the gut fauna off certain organisms that come in, particularly little insects or invertebrates. And so those get screened for to make sure that those don't get past the checkpoints in containment, and then when the organism is released out into the wild, those things that are within the organism that weren't detected may potentially thwart any potential for spread off that population of beneficial insect, or even cross over to something else that's it could end up transferring and causing a problem with populations that have never encountered that microorganism. So those are some of the key things that we must screen for. On the other side of containment, I guess if you don't bring in an organism that does exactly and specifically targets what you say it does, downstream that has the potential knock-on effects of becoming a problem itself. Or say, for example, you bring in an organism designed to get rid of a weed pest, but it turns out that beneficial organism you're bringing in starts eating not just the weed pest, but a whole suite of other things, including native weeds or plants, then that's where the real problem is. So with dung beetles at least, there are a limited number of potential diseases inside the organisms. And so far, with all the screening we've done in quarantine, we've found no diseases attached to these insects. So they're disease-free when they come out of containment, which is really good. And all we know what they do is that they breed in manure, but specifically manure off open grassland herbivorous mammals, i.e. livestock. One of the issues was, will these things feed on the manure of dogs? The answer is no, because these guys have co-evolved specifically to handle livestock manure in open grasslands. So these are really the potential things that we look at when we even apply to bring these things in.
How do you manage the demand from customers?
It's been interesting. We've had some customers on our books for several years, and that's right from the start of this whole process. We've had so much interest. It's been difficult because they've been patiently waiting for us to be able to get the numbers up to a sustainable level for us to be able to maintain a colony and also skim off from the colony to sell to our customers. There's a bit of patience on the side of those supporters and waiters for the product, but we've gotten to a point now where we've streamlined the process that we're able to cut down the delay time between someone giving us an order for a consignment of beetles and them actually receiving the beetles. So yeah, it's been interesting, but we're getting that gap down. So we're getting there.
We're back with Sean talking about the benefits and uses of dung beetles on farms today.
Farmers should look at dung beetles as another tool in the toolbox for improving sustainable farming. So far we've got riparian planting, so far we've got fencing. Another component which we could be utilising is the removal of dung using dung beetles. We've got pastoral earthworms. They're going to benefit from the removal of dung to within the soil. This is going to save financially any farmer more dollars in the pocket, because there's potential for a reduction in solid fertiliser inputs, and there's improvements in soil and productivity as well. So that's why farmers and why the benefits are so good for us. When we've intensified our livestock farming process, that kind of exacerbates the environmental and soil health problems that we encounter from intensive farming. Most of those can be attributed to compaction of the soil. So soil health deteriorates when you've got the macro pores and the air spaces in the soil horizon compressed down. That's a lack of oxygen and air flow supply to not only the microorganisms in the soil, but also to the grass and everything else. So it becomes almost anaerobic. The other one as well, of course, is water quality. And one of our big problems here at the moment is water quality issue. And that's mainly associated with manure or surface solid inputs running off these surfaces, because it's not going in, it's going across the surface and polluting our waterways. And that's a recreational problem with nutrient loading into the water, and it's also for the water quality itself, for disease, for using it for drinking. So there's two key issues there. So dung beetles are brought in, and simply the services that they provide farmers in manipulating that manure and making the tunnels beneath the soil. So if a farmer was to get his shovel and dig straight down underneath any cowpat that's being populated with dung beetles, he would expect to see something like this beneath the soil for one or two of the species that we've got. Some of the smaller beetles bury down their brood balls, probably down to about 20 centimetres beneath the soil surface. So underneath any given cowpat, you'll have a whole string of tunnels. Each tunnel is populated by a brood ball. And in each brood ball, we've got the grub developing. Not only gets the dung off the surface, but it's also increasing an entire soil substructure, which is full of airspace, because there's all the tunnels. There's all that bioturbation, which is basically moving all the subsoils up to the surface. So you're getting a mixing of the soils. You're getting the organic carbons, such as the manure, loaded into the soil horizon. The stuff that's not utilised by the dung beetles in their nesting behaviour is left over for microorganisms in the soil. It's also left over for the grass roots. So we see grass root biomass increasing significantly. We also see the depth in which the roots get beneath the soil, which is more friable after dung beetle activity. And that also helps because with deeper roots, there's an increased tolerance in environmental variations such as droughts. So deep roots help conserve the grass a bit longer when there's sustained periods of dryness. If you're getting rid of manure off the paddock and into the ground, not only is all that nutrient in the dung, it's phosphates and nitrates and everything else, that's all beneath the soil, all good for everything going on. So that whole soil environment becomes like a biological sponge, and it's a great filter for anything going in, all the stuff scrubbed out as it flows through into the water table beneath. On the surface, forage fouling is massive. You know, when you drive around the roads and you see on the paddocks on the side of the road, you see the the big green tillers and the swords all sitting there. Those are there because not only is that cow pat or horse pat, it's a repugnant thing for an animal wanting to graze around it. So a pile of poo sitting there is avoided at all costs by an animal. It's repugnant. So the area 5 times the size of that cow pat or horse pat is rendered unusable. And so you'll see an area where it's not grazed, so it's a big mound. And there's also all the nutrients in the dung, which are attributing to the grass actually growing at a much greater rate. So you can imagine that dung underground and the grass benefiting from just using those nutrients underground. The other really great thing with the soil structure and the biological activity is that studies overseas have shown in very similar pastoral habitats a 5-fold at least increase in earthworm abundance and biomass. So whatever's not used by the dung beetles, earthworms included, are bulking up on that more available manure that's in the soil horizon as well, which is really great.
How do you get dung beetles onto farms?
So through a series of me giving talks, workshops, going on to conferences, and marketing through advertising and various agricultural media, we get farmer interest in where they will order a colony of dung beetles suitable for the size of the farm which they have. If it's a hobby farm, such as lifestyle blocks, or a smaller farm or a large-scale commercial farm, they will come to us and ask for beetles. We will advise them on what's available and what species are most suitable for their region. And the process goes from there. So we go into a dialogue with the farmer as to when the beetles will be available and where they put them on their paddocks when they're getting shipped to them.
So what happens when the dung beetles arrive?
So when the dung beetle arrives to the farmer usually goes, "Yay!" like this. And he does that again when he realizes that all the beetles are fit and healthy inside the container which they arrive in. They will have received a series of instructions via me over the telephone where they put their beetles. And that's a real simple process. Invariably we have them put them in the centre of their paddock, centre positioning in their farm, and they fly between each brand new cow pat or horse pile or llama or goat or sheep. So basically we have a series of instructions that the farmers follow where they should put them, and they preload that paddock with a few sets stock to get some poos in there ready in time. So normally the courier takes 2 to 3 days delivery. Within that time, the farmer has time to put some stock into his seeding paddock, so to speak. And when they do arrive via the courier, that's when he's jumping up and down and going, yes, and sticks them out in the paddock.
Where to from here? What does the future hold for Dung Beetle Innovations?
We've got, species number 6 on the books. We've just had one now released from containment, and we've got that now mass rearing, so it adds to our toolkit of beetles, so to speak. We do have permission for 11 different kinds of beetles, so we're going to continue on bringing in the additional species. The original permit has been extended for us to be able to bring in more beetles as we go along the track. Logistically, it's difficult managing lots of beetles, so we shall expand our business to cater for not only additional beetles, but of course the sheer magnitude of the manure which we have to collect to put into our containers for rearing these things. So probably more staff, and most likely expand into a much bigger facility, because as the numbers of farmers grow on our lists, the numbers of beetles that we need to provide for them will increase quite significantly.
In the last 7 years, dung beetle release in New Zealand has gone from concept to reality. They are currently breeding 6 different species here. Another one has just arrived, and they have consent for a further 4. Dung Beetle Innovations are using overseas practices and research, but putting their own Kiwi spin on things. See you next time on Thinking Forward.